you so much for having me today. In contrast to the first two speakers, I am a population health scientist and epidemiologist by training, and we'll be talking to you today about equity considerations for genetic and genomic testing. And this talk today is a synthesis of some of the work that I have done personally and some of the work that deeply informs what I do that I think is important for all of us who are cancer researchers to keep in mind. And so, I'm so short though. So what I'm going to be talking about today is talking a little bit about theory, actually, in terms of thinking about precision cancer care equity, characterizing the consequences of the existence of structural racism in the field of precision medicine, and highlighting some of the patient perspectives related to equity in precision oncology care. And so really the core of my research program is who aren't we reaching with high quality cancer care and how do we reach them? And I came to this foundational research question guiding my program from this figure that many of us may be familiar with, displaying the trends in breast cancer mortality rates in the United States, with the x-axis spanning from 1975 to 2015 and the y-axis being the rate per 100,000 mortality. And here we can see that while breast cancer specific mortality has been declining over time for everyone, as we've gotten better at treating cancer, the mortality gaps have actually widened between Black and white women. And closing this gap for breast and other cancers is the core of my research program and what I hope to continue to work on. And so let's talk a little bit about theory. What is critical race theory and what is it not? If anyone in this room has watched the news over the last probably 6 months to a year, we've probably all seen some form of headline about critical race theory in our schools taking over some things. And just to illustrate that point, here are some headlines from the last year that have come up, several of these being from Tennessee specifically. My personal favorite in the top left, critical race theory used to promote atrocities. And so I'd like to take a small part of this talk to talk about what actually is critical race theory, since it has garnered so much attention, and then make the connection to how this relates to oncology care. And so critical race theory has been in the policy landscape for quite some time now. This is a hex map of the United States where the blue hexagon with the green arrow coming out of it is the state of Tennessee. In 2021, our governor signed in a bill into effect that limits how teachers can discuss racism and sexism in the classroom. So that is the overlying K through 12 context for these sorts of systemic issues currently in our state. Many states across the US Southeast have passed similar sorts of quote unquote critical race theory bans for K through 12 and also public university education as well. And the states in yellow have also introduced these sorts of legislation since that time. And so circling back to that question that I originally asked, what is critical race theory and what is it not? Critical race theory is not taught in K through 12 education, despite popular belief by these headlines. It is actually a theory that originated in the legal and policy sector in the 1970s and 1980s as a means of understanding how systemic racism influences public policy and legal outcomes. And so perhaps one of the most prominent examples of how critical race theory is used to understand systemic racism is the example of redlining. And here in a figure on the right is a discussion of redlining specifically in Nashville. And so for those who are unfamiliar, redlining is the discriminatory mortgage lending processes that prohibited primarily Black and Latinx individuals across the United States from getting mortgages to purchase homes. And this has resulted in very deep segregation that continues to exist in cities like Nashville and cities all across the country as the vestiges of redlining still exist despite it being outlawed. And so critical race theory helps us understand how things like redlining become ingrained in our policies and how they continue to manifest even when these policies have been made illegal. And so why am I talking about a legal and policy theory in a session on precision oncology? In 2010, Chandra Ford and Collins, Aru, and Bua described the public health critical race methodology as a way of pulling the thread through for how critical race theory relates to public health. And in this theory, they couch this in this idea of race consciousness, that our own racial socialization as researchers, as public health professionals, as cancer researchers, for example, shapes how we see the world, shapes the research questions that we ask, shapes how we interpret things. And then they discuss 4 key focus areas in their theory: the contemporary pattern of race relations, knowledge production, conceptualization and measurement, and action. And so earlier this year, I had a piece published in Nature Reviews Cancer, where I took this theory and applied it specifically to the cancer research enterprise. And so starting again from that broad idea of race consciousness, that our own racial socialization as cancer researchers, no matter where we are on the continuum from basic to translational science, shapes how we conduct our research, shapes who we invite into our labs and who we bring into our projects, and those sorts of factors. Thinking about how the contemporary patterns of race relations manifest, particularly in the cancer research enterprise, there has been the systematic exclusion of the global majority in cancer research. And I use global majority to mean folks who are not descended from European ancestry, which is primarily where a lot of our basic clinical original discoveries happened. And because these original, particularly in GWAS studies, began in primarily European descended populations, that has led to limited inferences in literally most of the globe. And also in terms of contemporary patterns of race relations, recognizing the mistrust of academic and medical institutions for marginalized populations. And so frequently in this space, historical events get invoked about past atrocities that have occurred, that have caused the mistrust of individuals in institutions. But we also need to reckon with current issues in cancer care delivery, and also more broadly, that these things still go on today. And there are reasons that individuals are mistrustful of medical institutions that have may have a little bit to do, or honestly nothing to do, with past atrocities. And so really reckoning with our current history as well. Thinking about knowledge production. So again, I had mentioned about how a lot of our original discoveries in cancer research have descended from European descended populations. And we really need to grapple with how that systematic exclusion of the global majority has shaped our current body of evidence in cancer research, and contend that we don't have a lot of answers for folks who are not European descended. And within that, a willingness to iterate on methods and admit that we've done things wrong and in a very exclusionary way that has limited these inferences in other populations, that has exacerbated cancer disparities and cancer inequities, even though we are increasing our capabilities in treating all sorts of cancers. Thinking about conceptualization and measurement, not conflating socially constructed race with ancestry. Race is a socially constructed category, and understanding how social determinants of health can also affect cancer care outcomes, and considering intersecting systems of oppression affecting cancer research. And so here I'm thinking about, for example, neocolonialism. And so while it is important to continue to diversify the sorts of individuals who are included in our cancer research studies, acknowledging that a lot of harm has been done across the globe through forces like colonialism, and not wanting to reinforce those issues as well. And then finally, thinking about action, inclusive study recruitment on all types of cancer research, considering the equity implications of new cancer-related innovations. If we are not thinking about inequity to start, cancer disparities and cancer inequities will continue to widen. Equity is a very intentional action. Moving beyond describing disparities and thinking about mechanisms for reducing inequities as well. And then finally, engaging stakeholders, particularly those who are most affected by cancer health inequities, and the work that they would like to see done to be able to improve and mitigate these issues. And so to really illustrate this point, since I was talking very high level theoretical about these sorts of issues, thinking about how does this actually manifest in cancer research. This was a paper published by Lord et al. About the genetic ancestry distribution of the Cancer Genome Atlas. And again, really hitting home the point that these foundational studies did not representatively primarily sampled individuals of European descent. That has led to very limited inferences for individuals outside of this group. And now we are constantly playing catch up, acknowledging that these individuals have not been historically included. And so also in this paper, Lord et al. Describe a pathway in which social and biological don't have to be in tension. And actually we can consider the biological determinants of health in parallel with the social determinants of health. And I really love this figure in terms of, at the same time, thinking about translational research, for example, the genetic ancestry of admixed populations, in parallel with identifying and mitigating structural racism, to end up with the ultimate end goal of health justice through reframing precision medicine and making precision medicine a reality for everyone. And so again, another very concrete example of how structural racism manifests and critical race theory can be used to understand our limitations in cancer research. This was a article that was based on some work from one of my mentors and colleagues, Tua Powell at Vanderbilt, and her collaborators, about how Black women have higher rates of abnormal BRCA mutations than previously thought. And again, this traces back to who was included in the first place and why it took so long to realize that this was an issue, and that Black women do also have BRCA mutations. And again, constantly playing catch up when individuals are not included to start with. Again, just really hammering home this point. Another more recent example as well is another article that was published in 2021 talking about how Oncotype DX, a genomic testing analysis that is done to help guide chemotherapy decisions in hormone receptor positive breast cancer, misses the mark on risk for Black women. And so again, thinking about how, as we are getting better and better at treating cancer, can we make sure that everybody is included and we are not actually exacerbating disparities because of how we conduct our research from the outset. And then finally, to talk about some of my current ongoing work in terms of considering equity among multiple dimensions. Right now, I've been in the process of conducting a patient-engaged study with women of all races living with metastatic breast cancer. Very frequently, we talk about the mortality toll of cancer in the United States, but actually metastatic cancer receives a limited amount of that attention and also a very small sliver of the research dollars. And so in this study, I have partnered with two organizations led by women with metastatic breast cancer called Project Life and GRASP. And in this, I wanted to understand policy issues affecting women with MBC and the role of patient-created initiatives. And we're in the process of developing a dissemination plan for this work with the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship. And even though talking about precision medicine specifically wasn't my main objective of this study, it is something that has come up time and time again through these interviews. And I just would like to share a little piece of that with you. And so an interview that I had conducted a couple of weeks ago was with a woman, a Latina woman diagnosed with de novo metastatic breast cancer in her early 40s, and was really grappling with the ability to access the care that was recommended to her by her oncologist at a NCI designated comprehensive cancer center. And so in our conversation, she said to me, so I did ask my oncologist, so for almost 2 years, I was taking letrozole and it wasn't really doing its job. Why wouldn't the insurance cover a liquid biopsy of sort? And so this particular participant was in a situation where she was experiencing substantial progression on her current treatment regimen, and her insurance would not cover additional genetic and genomic testing to be able to find more targeted therapies that her oncologist was medically recommending for her. And so she had to wait until open enrollment to switch insurance companies and find a plan that would then cover the sorts of testing that she was in need of. And so she faced that decision. Does she literally go bankrupt and pay for testing out of pocket, or does she wait, potentially shortening her life until open enrollment when she can switch her plan? Once she switched her plan, she could get her test. She got on a new treatment regimen, and her metastatic cancer became substantially better controlled. But thinking about this intersection between precision medicine and policy, and also making sure that our policies are keeping up with where our discoveries are going. Another participant that I talked to within the last couple of weeks was a young Black woman diagnosed with de novo metastatic triple negative breast cancer in her 30s, was talking to me about clinical trials and how she had wanted to participate in clinical trials and was finding that difficult to be able to connect with care providers who would recommend that for her, help her find her best options. And so she said to me, clinical trials should be introduced as a treatment option when we're diagnosed. And so I have to admit that it wasn't immediately offered. It was like, hey, we're going to try this traditional chemotherapy. And so very frequently we talk about getting more individuals of color involved in clinical trials and ask ourselves why they aren't participating. And I think that there's also this big gap about these individuals who do want to participate and are trying to seek out these options and are unable to find them because they don't have folks who are prepared to meet them where they are in these sorts of conversations. And I do want to add, because I think it's important that particularly in the metastatic space, as I've learned conducting these interviews over the last couple of months, that people are talking to each other about precision medicine and genetic and genomic testing and filling in some of the gaps that the healthcare system has created. And so this same participant said to me, so in speaking with my peers, they had similar experiences where they were not provided with all of the options until they advocated for themselves. And so and talking with this participant and how she was talking with other Black women with metastatic breast cancer about how they got connected with trials that they were eligible for, that they could bring up to their oncologist, that really shaped her care experiences. And so thinking about the utility of patient groups, and particularly in filling in those gaps where we are falling short in the cancer research enterprise, and being able to connect particularly marginalized patients to cancer precision medicine. And so a couple of takeaways. The cancer research enterprise is structurally inequitable and has contributed substantially to health inequities from all the way from the basic science through the translational and population health. I hope I have convinced you in articulating that these inequities are rife throughout the entire system. Evaluating population level trends in genetic and genomic testing is crucial in understanding where we're missing the mark. And then finally, patient and community engagement can help us more thoroughly identify gaps and honestly think of potential solutions. These women that I've talked to over the last couple of months have had such phenomenal ideas for how we can radically rethink equity in precision medicine and cancer care delivery more broadly. And I think that it would behoove us all to listen to those more who are most affected. Thank you.